I tried to tell you.
Starting with the discipline of this team.
Today on Power Hour SEC, we'll share with you the truth about Mark Stoops. It's not that he's struggling this year, it's that he's actually never really been all that good.
I encourage anybody that's disgruntled to pony up some more.
The issue is he has already signed a pretty fat extension, so you might be stuck with him, Kentucky. And I understand, before I share everything else, you guys are going to get in my comments and say, well, did you know that Kentucky was awful and Mark Stoops has as many 10-win seasons as all of Kentucky combined before he got there? I get that, but even those seasons were flawed. So stick with this. We're going to run through all these points showing why this guy might be the luckiest coach I've ever seen. So we're going to run through multiple points of data here, starting off with the shortest because we've already done a 30-plus minute video on Kentucky's fraudulent strength of schedule. In theory, they in fact have played an ACC, Big 12, Pac-12 strength of schedule because did you know they're the only team in the conference to not have a top 10 SEC schedule ever since Stoops has been there. In fact, every other team in the SEC has been in the top 7 at least twice. Point number 2 is coach luck. Now, what makes college football so interesting is it's not just who you are as a coach and who you are as a program, but your success is also a byproduct of who is on the opposite sideline. And the golden era of Mark Stoops really began in 2016. Well, what else happened around that time? Well, 3 legendary coaches left programs. So Petrino left Louisville around 2018. South Carolina lost Steve Spurrier right before the Stoops golden era in 2015. And the same thing could be said about Gary Pinkel. Now, all 3 of those coaches, you can make a strong case, are the best coaches ever at their universities. All of them leave. And before they left, Mark Stoops' record against these programs are 4-7. And after they left, the program is 14-3 versus those 3 schools, and that doesn't include this latest Missouri result. So Scott Satterfield, Barry Odom, and of course Will Muschamp, not as good as their predecessors, and it showed. So it lends itself into point number 3, where the Vols have just dominated Kentucky despite them making horrible coaching hires. Now, Tennessee is a better program than Kentucky, but with Derek Dooley, Butch Jones, Jeremy Pruitt, and now, let's be honest, Josh Heupel is a superstar. I think he's absolutely fantastic. But for the most part, even though those coaches weren't the best, Mark Stoops struggled. He was 2-9 versus Tennessee during his entire period, and only 2 of these losses were by 1 possession or less. And that includes that 2018 awesome Kentucky team. They went to Neyland and got blown out by Jaron Guerin. I don't even know how to say his last name, but he was bad. So for point number 4, let's just run through every Mark Stoops season very briefly. And I want you to keep in mind, point number 1, that these schedules as a whole are easier than your average SEC schedule, okay? So in Mark Stoops' first 3 seasons, he was a combined 12-24. And to be honest, I really don't care about that, right? He needed to rebuild the program. It was early in this career. But it is important to point out that during that period, he was very lucky to keep his job. Okay, let's take someone like Mississippi State's Joe Moorhead, who had more victories in his first 2 seasons than Mark Stoops had in his first 3. He was fired. And then Jim McElwain, he went to 2 SEC championship games. So now we take a look at 2016, and it started off with an upset loss to the Southern Miss Golden Eagles, a 25-point lead squandered by Kentucky at home. But the season got better as it moved on. You can argue this was the best win of the Stoops tenure, going on the road and beating rival Louisville and Lamar Jackson by 3. 2017, there really wasn't anything memorable. So they started off the season really hot, kind of a scare at Southern Miss, but that South Carolina victory versus a pretty good Gamecocks team was impressive. Now, I will say this end of year was ugly. So 2018 Kentucky is what everyone would consider Stoops' best team, but once again, the strength of schedule wasn't great, and they started off the year barely beating 1-win Central Michigan. But you look overall at the beginning of the season, they're pretty daggum good with an incredibly impressive victory on the road versus a 10-win Kentucky team, and that also includes a victory versus a pesky South Carolina team and a close loss to Texas A&M on the road. Now, that Texas A&M team was pretty solid, and it took overtime to beat the Wildcats, but when you take a look at the second half of the season, it gets ridiculous. You get two really close victories versus not so great teams. And then, they had a weird game versus Middle Tennessee. I think they were outgained in that one. But I want to focus on this Penn State game. By far the most loaded team I think I've seen Mark Stoops beat. But it featured one of the worst coaching mistakes I think I've ever seen, and it was 100% on Mark Stoops. So Benny Snell ran a touchdown in here to become the all-time Wildcats rushing leader. But during that distraction, you must go for 2 here so you don't go up by 20. Instead, you can go up by 21. So Penn State was able to come back. They run mesh right here, and if they're able to get this football to KJ Hamler, he probably scores. 31 bats it down at the line of scrimmage. Penn State settles for a field goal, and the Wildcats win. So very lucky, Stoops. So we get to 2019, and this season was very nondescript. 2 of the victories against bad Arkansas, bad Vandy, 2 of the worst teams they've ever had, and that's saying something. And then, obviously, some blowout losses. Really nothing exciting outside of the Lynn Bowden storyline, and it got really spicy. Here he is punching a guy pregame, but look at his accomplishments. And in this game, he was able to pull out another close Mark Stoops victory. So not really a whole lot going here. And then we get to 2020. This was the Rona season, and it was ugly. So this was the first year that the schedule couldn't be manipulated by the Wildcats. Once again, check out the other piece to see how they do that very thing. But you see here, no real results. That bowl game versus NC State had a bunch of opt-outs. But you take a look at their 4 SEC wins. Those teams were a combined 9-31. So just for reference, these are the teams that Kentucky beat. And there you go, the 4 worst teams in the SEC that year. So we then get to 2021 Kentucky, and you could make a strong case. Now, you guys might think I'm a hater, but this could be the worst 10-win SEC team we've ever seen. So, first off, they barely survived versus a mediocre Tennessee Chattanooga Mocs team. They got very lucky that they caught the worst LSU team this century as the 6-game rotational cross-division rival rule, which is changing next season. Lots of blowout losses, and as you guys just saw, only 2 wins all season versus teams that finished with a winning record, and that included this 10-3 Iowa team that was very flawed, and they could have just gone for this 4th and 1 to win the game, but they were chicken. Kentucky got the ball back, and they ended up winning thanks to Wan'Dale Robinson. So 2022 is when things began to clearly unravel, but Kentucky still decided to go with the kiss of death. We'll get to that in just a second, but man, this beef between Coach Cal and Mark Stoops was so hilarious because, well, Coach Cal was right. Kentucky is a basketball school, not a football school, because a football school wouldn't have struggled with Northern Illinois to start the year. They wouldn't have struggled versus Miami of Ohio right out of the gate, but that's not here nor there. I will give Kentucky credit. They have dominated Florida. They've won the last 3, including this season, and 4 out of the last 6, but it always helps when Anthony Richardson throws a pick 6 right to somebody. And then, look, the Ole Miss game was very unlucky. Kentucky had a few calls go against them, but they were still woefully outgained in this one, and honestly, things started to get really ugly after a long bye week. A good victory versus Mississippi State, I'll give you that, but you got blown out by Tennessee with an extra week to prepare. Now, that Tennessee team was legendary, but you followed that up with a circus ending with this crazy fake, roughing the punter penalty that helped you win this one. And guess what Kentucky decided to do? The kiss of death. The extension for a coach who really hasn't done anything special. He got a $2 million a year raise from 6.3 to 8.6, and then he also got a $3 million buyout raise. So he signs his contract, and the very next day, he treats Kentucky to a home loss to Vanderbilt. That continued throughout the rest of the season. They weren't very competitive versus Georgia yet again, and then they got blown out in their bowl game. And what was really crazy is they only had 2 games in 2022 with 20 or more offensive points and 0 games of 30-plus offensive points. And the final one here, they had 3 games of single-digit points. Yes, less than 10, and they had a second-round quarterback. So the 2023 season started off with a bang, including a Florida blowout, but as you guys could see, this is probably the softest opening month I've ever seen from an SEC schedule, and now they have 2 consecutive blowout losses. And one thing Mark Stoops has been constantly elite at is penalties. They've always been in the top 5 range. Now they are 13th in yards and penalties per game. So what does Mitch Barnhart do now? Well, the first thing he needs to do is reflect on how bad of an extension this initially was. And all you had to do was take a look at the close game luck. So K Ford Ratings does something very interesting on Twitter each and every week. He flips the one possession results in the opposite direction. Let's do the same thing here with Kentucky because, as you guys have seen, they've had a ridiculous amount of close game luck, including stuff like this, right? They get this phantom pass interference penalty versus Missouri, and they're able to play one final play, and they win this game. And that was one of the 10 victories that Kentucky won in 2018, right? So, overall, since 2016, Kentucky has been unbelievably lucky in one-score games, going 22-11. So, yes, it is true that Kentucky's had some bad luck, but mostly unbelievably good fortune. And the funny thing is the inverse of it is not true because most of their losses are blowouts, okay? So if we know that Kentucky has 39 total losses since 2016, and we also know that only 11 were by 1 possession or less, that means the other 28 weren't really close at the final whistle, and 16 of those 28 were by 17-plus points. In other words, 3 possessions or more blowouts. And then we get to a very simple question. What is Mark Stoops' best win at Kentucky? Is it just an overall accumulation of this recent domination of Florida? I don't know, but these are the 3 I could find, but nothing anytime recent.
You know, you just change your uniform, talk a little game, dance around, put on some stupid sunglasses, and you could change a climate. But to change a culture is at the core.
But at SEC Media Days, he talked about stupid sunglasses and dancing. Come on, come on.
So I'm not going to lie, that was absolutely hilarious. But what if I told you Shane Beamer had 2 wins in 2 weeks last year that are way better than any Mark Stoops victory during his decade at Kentucky? Mark Stoops, a defensive coach, has had, for the most part, pretty good defenses. As you can see, Power 5 adjusted numbers are top 5 in the SEC right now, and overall, they have floated around that top 5 mark throughout his tenure, but offensively, it's just been not good. They're very unimaginative. OC's in, OC's out. Not a good offense this year, and you just see historically, this side of the football is just more important in the modern game, and they have just not gotten it done. We get to point number 9, which is recruiting. And I understand there's only so much you can do at Kentucky, but still, Mark Stoops has only had, I believe, 1-ish top 25 class, and that doesn't really do much to inspire you. And if I didn't have a team full of a ton of talent, I would prefer that coach to be an offensive, creative-minded coach. Now, why is this never really been an issue for Kentucky? Well, it's because of their old scheduling format, right? Instead of Mississippi State next season, who they play every year, they'll have to play Texas, and in the future, with the schedule dynamics changing and potentially an improving Louisville squad, you're in a lot of trouble when it comes to who you play. And Mitch Barnhart himself says a big reason why Kentucky's had the success they've had is because of their scheduling. So let me know what you guys think. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive today. I don't think Mark Stoops is bad. I just don't think he's good either. He's replaceable. In Kentucky, you can do better. Now, when does a switch actually happen, or does Mark Stoops miraculously turn this thing around? I don't know. Let me know in the comments section. Now, if you want to know the super secret person behind Kentucky's football success, bang! And his name is not Mitch Barnhart. It's floating right here, okay?